is Jo March. When we first meet Jo, she's a tomboyish, hot-tempered, geeky 15-year-old girl. She loves activity and can't bear to be left on the sidelines. It drives her crazy that she can't go and fight in the Civil War alongside her father, who has volunteered as a chaplain. Instead, Jo has to stay at home and try to reconcile herself to a 19th century woman's place in the domestic sphere, which is extremely difficult for her. You can hear the trouble in her name. She's called Josephine, a feminine name, but she goes by a more masculine sounding Jo. She's clumsy, blunt, opinionated, and jolly. Her behavior is often most unladylike. She swears mildly, burns her dress while warming herself at the fire, spills things on her only gloves, and barely tolerates her cranky old Aunt March. She's so boyish that Mr. March has referred to her as his son Joe in the past, and her best friend Lori sometimes calls her my dear fellow. Jo also loves literature, both reading and writing it. She composes plays for her sisters to perform and writes stories that she eventually gets published. She imitates Dickens and Shakespeare and Scott, and whenever she's not doing chores, she curls up in her room, in a corner of the attic, or outside, completely absorbed in a good book. Jo hopes to do something great when she grows up, although she's not sure what it might be. Perhaps writing a great novel. Whatever it is, it's not going to involve getting married. Jo hates the idea of romance, because marriage might break up her family and separate her from her sisters that she adores. Now we have Meg. Meg is short for Margaret, and she's the oldest, and unfortunately until Amy grows up, she's the prettiest of the four March sisters. She's also the most typical of the sisters. We think of her as everything that you might expect of a 19th century American girl from a good family to be. Meg loves luxury, nice things, dainty food, and good society. She's the only sister who can really remember when her family used to be wealthy, and she feels nostalgic about those good old days. Her dream is to be wealthy once more and have a huge mansion with lots of servants and expensive possessions. She's also a bit of a romantic. When she has to tell a story to amuse her sisters, it's about love and marriage, and Jo starts to suspect pretty early on that Meg might have a real-life Prince Charming in her thoughts. Meg is sweet-natured, dutiful, and not at all flirtatious. In fact, she's unrealistically good and proper. Perhaps that's why she's so alarmed by her sister Jo's rambunctiousness. Okay, tomboyish behavior, whatever. Each of the March sisters has at least one major character flaw that she struggles to overcome, and Meg is no different. Meg's problem is, well, avarice, greed, envy, wanting stuff that other people have. Whatever you call it, she's got it in spades. Meg tries to set aside her materialism and gradually learns to value simple things more because of the hard work that it takes to earn them. Before she gets to that point, however, she spends many, many hours envying the fortune and leisured life of her friends, Sally Gardner and the Moffat girls. In fact, at one point, Meg allows Moffat girls to dress her up in fancy clothes, covering her in makeup and jewelry, and making her show far more cleavage than a demure Protestant 19th century girl really should. She even, well, no, you'll be horrified here, drinks champagne at one point. It only takes Meg one bout of this kind of vanity and wealth worship to realize that the people she's trying to impress are unbelievably shallow. She doesn't feel like herself, and when she hears someone at the party say that she's dressed up like a doll, she realizes that exactly what she's turned herself into, and she never does it again. Even at her wedding, Meg wears a simple dress, and she made it herself by hand. And yeah, I did say wedding. Sorry if you haven't read the book. Of course, Meg is the most traditionally feminine of the sisters, gets married. Her parents force her to wait until she is 20 before committing herself. An unusual step for parents of their time, but the Marches aren't typical in any way. But when Meg does marry, it's not to a wealthy man who can keep her in the style of Moffat. It's to a poor, hardworking, orphaned John Brooke. Meg and John don't have much money, but they do have love. They also have something else that Meg's upbringing has taught her: their Protestant work ethic. Between these two qualities, they do just fine, and Meg soon fulfills the other function of a 19th century woman producing children. Her twins Daisy and Demi become the newest members of the March family. We are on sister 3 out of 4. Bear with me. Her name is Beth. Beth is one of those children in a novel who is so good and sweet and perfect that you just know she's going to die because nothing interesting could ever happen to her, and anyone that angelic belongs in heaven. Okay, if we spoiled that one for you, But seriously, Beth is happy and content at home, too shy to go to school or out in the world, and spends her time doing sweet little things around the house to make her family, her pet cats, and even her dolls happy and comfortable. She's doomed. She has no ambitions, no desires, doesn't dream about getting married, and thinks about God and heaven a lot. These are all the signs that a 19th century author used to tell you that a kid is not long for this world. The only thing that really surprises us is that she survives. She survives her first bout of scarlet fever and doesn't die until the second half of the novel, okay? Beth's only earthly love is music. She adores playing the piano and singing, and the only material thing that she wants is a nicer piano since her family is old and out of tune. The piano that she longs for is provided by her wealthy neighbor, old Mr. Lawrence, who gives her his dead granddaughter's old piano. You were still missing out on the signs that Beth is going to die? Then you should get suspicious when you find out that Beth reminds Mr. Lawrence of the little granddaughter he had who died young. Anyway, Beth shares this anonymous girl's music talent, and by logic of the sentimental novel, she's also going to share her early demise. Of course, Beth's love of music isn't that earthly, however, either. She mostly sings hymns, and her connection to such an art form also reinforces the idea that she belongs in heaven, not in the parlor. She just kind of dies, as she reaches adulthood. She has a significant effect on the people around her, especially her sister Jo. As Jo nurses Beth through her final illness, she realizes how important domestic duties really are. Jo resolves to take over Beth's role as the glue that holds the family together, caring for her parents and cherishing the everyday tasks that Beth did so lovingly. In this way, Beth's example lives on, although perhaps with a little more spice and a little less sugar. Now we have Amy March. Amy March is a sister that most readers love to hate. She's the youngest of the family, and she fits the stereotype of the spoiled youngest child. Amy's vanity begins with her appearance. She's a pretty child and turns into a beautiful, stately woman with lovely golden hair and blue eyes. The only thing that bothers her is that her nose isn't quite aristocratic looking enough. It's a little snub nose instead of a stately Roman nose. You can bet that if Amy had lived in an era of plastic surgery, she'd gone in for a nose job. As it is, she has to try to reshape her nose herself by wearing a clothespin on it while she's sleeping. Amy's anxiety about her nose, however, is just the beginning of her obsession with all things upper class. Amy's great ambition is to be a gentlewoman. She tries to make the most of her clothes and accessories, cultivates grace and politeness, and makes social calls on the family's wealthy friends and neighbors. She's pretty successful at it, too. Amy's interest in high society might be shallow, but her kind heart is deep, and people appreciate her classy behavior. As a child, her ambitions seem ridiculous. She's always misusing big words and affecting little snobby behaviors. Sometimes she even shows signs of a violent temper, such as when she burns one of Jo's manuscripts in revenge for being left at home while her sisters and Lori attend to play. And she's also overly sensitive, possibly even spoiled. One punishment for breaking the rules at school is enough to make her resolve never to go back. But when she grows into a woman, Amy is far more genteel, and she's a big hit both at home and abroad. In fact, it's Amy's decorous behavior that convinces Aunt Carol to take her to Europe and her Aunt March to pay for the trip. Amy hopes to use her European adventure to cultivate and refine her artistic skills. From childhood on, Amy's tried every kind of visual art there is, from painting to sketching to sculpting. Most 19th century women dabbled in these arts, but Amy hopes to make a career out of them. In fact, she wants more than a career. She wants to do the work of a genius. Eventually, Amy has to admit to herself that while she's talented, she doesn't have that special extra inspiration that would mark her as a true artist. Instead, she contents herself with fashioning her life artistically. It's easy for Amy to turn her focus from her art to her life when Lori arrives in Europe and starts hanging out with her. Freed from the patterns of interaction that were set for them by the family dynamic back home, Amy and Lori discover each another anew. Lori realizes that Amy is exactly the kind of graceful, principled woman who would make a good wife for him, and Amy realizes that Lori's strength and comfort mean more to her than anyone else's ever could. Sadly, this disrupts Amy's plan to be a gold digger and marry the wealthy Fred Vaughn for his money. But As Marmie's daughter, Amy was always destined to realize that love means more than money and that respect is an important component of marriage. Of course, she still gets money anyway since Laurie himself is rich. We have two more characters left that aren't the March sisters. The first one is Marmie. Marmie is the affectionate name that the March girls use for their mother, Mrs. March, whose real first name, like her eldest daughter, is Margaret. Mrs. March is essentially the perfect mother. She works hard but is never too busy to console and counsel her daughters. She cheerfully does charitable work and helps out with the war effort. She's an ideal housekeeper, a loving mother, and a highly principled woman. She never loses her temper, she never misses anything, and she protects her children while still allowing them to make mistakes and learn their own lessons. Marmie is a bit of a mystery. We don't really know how she manages to have so much emotional strength, although it's suggested that her religious faith helps a lot. The only time that we really get a glimpse of the woman underneath the perfect mother is at the moment that Marmie reveals to Jo that she used to have a really bad temper. Of course, she has managed to cure herself of it almost completely, or at least to hide it so that she doesn't snap at people. Marmie's perfection contrasts intriguingly with her unconventional beliefs. She doesn't encourage her daughters to marry for money, even though their family is poor. She believes that hard work, faith, and strong principles are the most important things in life. She believes that the poorest elements in society, such as the immigrant family, the Hummels, are just as valuable as any other members of society. And she makes sure that all her daughters are educated and can make decisions for themselves instead of marrying them off to men who will make those decisions for them. Last important character is Laurie. Laurie is short for Theodore Lawrence, is the March girls' wealthy next-door neighbor. He's a high-spirited young man about the same age as Jo. Until the March girls come along, he's moody, bad-tempered, and often bored. Like many other teenagers, he has plans for his life that are pretty different than his guardians. His grandfather, old Mr. Lawrence, wants him to go into the family business and be a merchant, importing expensive goods from India. Laurie, however, wants to be a great composer, or maybe just run away and have adventures while traveling. And like many other teenagers, Laurie compromises with his guardian by agreeing to go to college. When Laurie and Jo meet, they immediately hit it off and become good friends. Laurie's feelings eventually turn romantic, but Jo insists that she can never fall in love with Laurie. In a way, it's because they're too similar. Both of them have touchy tempers, but really, it's not Laurie's fault. Jo likes him, but doesn't love him. Luckily, he's able to transfer his affections to her sister, Amy, whose manners make much better match for his wealth and social position. It's a happy, if creepy, ending to their love triangle. Laurie's main function in the narrative, besides providing a Y chromosome in this heavily female novel, to show the redeeming influence of the March girls. At many points, including his time in college and his period of distracted wandering through Europe, Laurie is in danger of doing what the 19th century society calls going to the bad. Gambling, taking a mistress, drinking, or other not good behavior. But his friendship with the March girls, his desire to keep their good opinion, and his tendency to absorb their moral principles all work together to keep him on the straight and narrow path. Next is John Brooke. John Brooke is a hard-working, orphaned young man who is forced to take a job as Laurie's tutor in order to support himself, despite the fact that he's only a few years older than Laurie. He is quiet and reserved, but he quickly falls in love with the pretty, demure Meg. After he impresses Mr. and Mrs. March with his upright character, he is given permission to court Meg. At first, Meg enjoys toying with John's feelings, but when Aunt March tries to convince her that she should marry for money, she passionately defends John. Since John overhears her, it's pretty certain that they're going to get engaged. John makes the perfect husband and father, and he and Meg live happily, though not eventfully after. Now we have Daisy and Demi Brooke. Daisy and Demi are the twin children of Meg and John Brooke. They are loosely named for their parents. Daisy is a nickname for Margaret, which is Meg's full name and her mother's first name also. Demi is short for Demihan, making Demi the namesake of his father, John Brooke. Meg's twins may look alike, but their personalities are radically different. Daisy is a quiet, obedient girl who likes to play homemaker, while Demi is curious, questioning, and constantly getting into mischief. Somehow, though, Demi is almost more of a favorite with the family, perhaps because he has a stronger personality or is more realistic character. We're not sure if any child is really as perfect as Daisy. We have Aunt March. Aunt March, not to be confused with Aunt Carol, is, as her name suggests, the March girls' aunt. If you want to get specific, she's a paternal aunt by marriage, their father's sister-in-law. For a while, Jo works as Aunt March's companion, reading to her and taking care of her spoiled little dog. Aunt March is fussy and particular and extremely irritating to Jo. After Beth catches scarlet fever, Aunt March is forced to take in young Amy, who needs to be quarantined. Amy and Aunt March hit it off pretty well. Amy admires Aunt March's jewelry and wealth, and Aunt March likes the fact that Amy has better manners than Jo. This switcheroo proves unpleasant when Amy is rewarded for her good manners by a trip to Europe with another aunt, Aunt Carol. Next is Hannah. Hannah is the March family servant. She has lived with them and served them since Meg's birth, and even though the family has fallen on hard times, she feels loyal to them and continues to work for them, possibly sometimes without wages. She's like one of the family, but she also isn't one of the family. She's a servant, and there is a class boundary between her and the Marches. Hannah's presence reminds us that the March family is still somewhat genteel and upper class in spite of their reduced circumstances. It also reminds us of just how much work was necessary to keep a 19th century house going. Marmee, her 4 daughters, and Hannah can only barely keep up with it. Now we have the Hummels. The Hummels are a poor, fatherless German immigrant family who live in a rundown shack. All of the Marches, but especially Beth and Marmee, help care for the Hummel children, bringing them food, clothes, and firewood. The Hummels are grateful for this charity, but even the kindness of the March family can't keep their baby from dying of scarlet fever. The Hummels remind us that, no matter how poor the Marches may seem, true poverty is much more severe and involves heartbreaking suffering. Now we have the Moffats. The Moffats are a wealthy local family with whom the older March girls sometimes socialize. When Meg goes to stay with the Moffat girls for a party, she is enchanted by their wealth and enjoys living the high life with them. However, in spite of their wealth and advantages, the Moffats are foolish people who don't seem to have any strong values or beliefs. They represent the thoughtless, immoral society that the Marches opt out of. Now we have Sally Gardner. Sally Gardner is a friend of Meg's about the same age, but with far more money and a higher social status. Meg constantly compares herself to Sally, wishing that she had Sally's advantages in life. Sally eventually marries Ned Moffat, who is also rich, and they lead a life of leisure. However, Sally appreciates Meg for who she is. The girls remain friends after their respective marriages and despite the differences in their financial situations. The next family that we have are the Vaughns. The Vaughns are an aristocratic British family and friends of the Lawrences. The March girls meet them at a picnic hosted by Laurie, and there is much friendly British versus American banter. Kate Vaughn, the oldest girl, is patronizing to Meg because Meg has to work as a governess. Fred, the twin, brother of Frank, tries to cheat Jo at a croquet, and she exposes him. Grace, the youngest, becomes fast friends with Amy. In later years, Fred Vaughn falls in love with Amy and asks her to marry him. She almost does so simply because he is wealthy and pleasant, but eventually realizes that her affections lie elsewhere. Lastly, we have Aunt Carol and Florence. So Aunt Carol, not to be confused with Aunt March, is, as her name suggests, the March girls' aunt and the mother of their cousin Florence, also known as Flo. Impressed by Amy's good manners and artistic talents, Aunt Carol and her husband take Amy along with Flo on a European tour. Aunt Carol doesn't have a very well-developed character. She's really just there to provide the opportunity for Amy to travel.